may I not? I don't want to lose people.
Yeah, just wait like a minute.
The subcommittee will come to order. We have members who are here and drinking some coffee in the side room. So I'm not starting without Ted. He's really here. And Mr. Connolly, I don't know if you have seen the current issue of Time magazine, but like President Trump, Mr. Connolly is the cover boy for this week's edition, and the headline is Connolly so tired keeps winning, and he's increasingly tired of winning. Correct? But congratulations. It's not everyone who can be on the cover of Time. But we meet today pursuant to notice
I
the
have
markup.
to, if I may,
Yes,
Madam
sir.
Chair,
Yes, sir.
it tells you something about how literal-minded some people can be, though. I've actually had people saying, congratulations, it's about time you get recognized. Will you sign that cover for me? You know. Oh, well. It's a thank everybody.
I'll have to bring my order, my edition, and you can sign it for me as well. We'll auction it, give it to charity. But we meet today pursuant to notice to mark up 7 bipartisan measures. As your offices were previously notified, it is the intent of the chair to consider today's measures en bloc. And so without objection, the following items, which were provided to members earlier this week, are in your packets, are considered as read and will be considered en bloc. House Resolution 185, calling on the government of Iran to fulfill repeated promises of assistance in the case of Robert Levinson, the longest-held United States civilian in our nation's history. House Resolution 218, recognizing the importance of the United States-Israel economic relationship and encouraging new areas of cooperation. Ross-Leighton amendment in the nature of a substitute to House Resolution 218. House Resolution 274, condemning the government of Iran's state-sponsored persecution of its Baha'i minority and its continued violation of the international covenants on human rights. Ross-Leighton and Amendment 28 to House Resolution 274. House Resolution 317, calling for the unconditional release of United States citizens and legal permanent resident aliens being held for political purposes by the government of Iran. Ross-Leighton amendment in the nature of a substitute to House Resolution 317. House Resolution 359, urging the European Union to designate Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization and increase pressure on it and its members. And H.R. 2646, the United States-Jordan Defense Cooperation Extension Act. After my remarks and the ranking member's remarks on these measures, I'll be glad to recognize any other members seeking recognition. Without objection, all members may have 5 days to submit statements for the record on today's business. Today we have before us a series of important measures that get to the heart of some of this subcommittee's top priorities. Unfortunately, for the 3rd straight Congress, we are marking up yet another resolution presented by Ranking Member Deutsch on behalf of his constituent, Robert Levinson, who went missing in Iran and is the longest-held United States citizen in our history. While the Levinson family laments his absence as life's milestones continue without Bob, we rededicate our commitment to bringing him home to his family and to continuing to press the administration to demand the regime fulfill its promises. And we do so in tandem with my resolution, House Resolution 317, which calls upon Iran to release unconditionally all U.S. citizens, U.S. legal permanent resident aliens, and foreign nationals that the regime has unjustly detained and is holding hostage. Ever since Iran signed the JCPOA and received a ransom payment in exchange for American hostages, it has sought to take advantage of what it believed was a lucrative policy. It was emboldened and has since imprisoned dual U.S. Iranian citizens, the Namazis, a father and son who have been separated from their families, sentenced to prison on unjust and trumped-up charges, and whose health and well-being are in jeopardy. The regime has imprisoned U.S. legal resident Nizar Zaka and sentenced him to 10 years under false charges. Mr. Zaka announced this week that he has begun a hunger strike. This subcommittee has received an audio of Mr. Zaka where he states, quote, "I am innocent, never done any crime in my life," end quote. I would like to ask unanimous consent to insert into the record a transcript of the transcribed telephone conversation of Mr. Zaka from Evin prison in Iran. My resolution also calls on Iran to fulfill its promises regarding Robert Levinson, Mr. Deutsch's constituent. This will be the third consecutive Congress that Ted and I mark up a resolution on Iran's persecution of the Baha'i, and we'd like to recognize some of them are in the audience today. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, over 200 Baha'i leaders have been executed. Many more have been arbitrarily imprisoned. More than 10,000 have been dismissed from government and university posts. We're calling on the United States and others to use these tools and all available authorities to sanction individuals directly responsible for these serious human rights abuses, and not just against the Baha'is. We must be willing to do what is right and demand that Iran release all hostages and hold the regime accountable for its human rights abuses and for its illicit activities. That is why we're also here to take up House Resolution 359, urging the European Union to designate Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization, and this is authored by Ranking Member Deutsch and Mr. Bilirakis. The notion that there can be separate wings of a terrorist organization and that one wing is bad and full of terrorists, but the other wing is merely a political organization, that is an absurd thought. There can be no justification for such a bifurcation. Iran is a state sponsor of terror, and Hezbollah is its foremost proxy. The European Union needs to wake up, and we must urge it and its member states to designate the whole of Hezbollah as the terrorists that they are. Also, a great tool to combat Hezbollah's activities is to strengthen our relationship with the Democratic Jewish State of Israel, which is why we are pleased to take up Ted Lieu's House Resolution 218. Thank you, Mr. Lieu, recognizing the importance of that economic relationship and encouraging new areas of cooperation. Israel was the first country we signed a free trade agreement with over 30 years ago, and while the economic and commercial ties remain strong, we can certainly find ways to upgrade and improve those. That is why Mr. Lieu's resolution is important, because it stresses the support not only to expand our economic relationship, but it also urges the President to explore new agreements with Israel in the fields of cybersecurity, technology, medicine, agriculture, water, and energy. We've already seen this happening between Israel and Jordan, especially in the fields of energy and water. And that is one of the major goals of our final measure, a bill I authored alongside Mr. Deutsch, Hal Rogers, Nita Lowey, and Adam Schiff, the United States-Jordan Defense Cooperation Extension Act. I'm glad to see that Congresswoman Kay Granger of Texas has also co-sponsored the bill. The act would authorize the U.S. to enter into a new 5-year Memorandum of Understanding, MOU, with Jordan. The kingdom has been on the front lines in the fight against ISIS, and in the humanitarian crisis, we must stand with our ally and continue to strengthen its security capabilities. This bill would also authorize the creation of a Jordanian Enterprise Fund, which is precisely what Jordan needs to attract private investment to help entrepreneurs and small businesses create jobs and spur economic development in Jordan. We're hopeful that we can tie some economic developments in Jordan alongside its neighbors, including Israel, to spur economic growth and bring these nations closer together to create long-term stability. So I urge my colleagues to support all of these measures, and the chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Deutsch, for his statement.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'd like to express my support for all of these measures before us today. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of each of them, and I thank the chairman for moving this bipartisan slate of bills. The U.S.-Jordan relationship is one that provides needed stability throughout the region, and I am pleased to join the chair in offering this legislation, which will further ensure that Jordan has the resources she needs to defend herself and to help shore up the Jordanian economy. I'd like to thank Mr. Lieu for his resolution highlighting the U.S.-Israel economic partnership. The country with the third most companies listed on the NASDAQ is Israel. Israel's been a true incubator for innovation, just one of the many reasons that the United States and Israel enjoy deep cooperation on a wide range of issues. I want to thank the chairman for bringing forward the resolution I introduced with Mr. Bilirakis, urging the EU to designate Hezbollah as a terrorist organization. I thank the many members of this committee who have co-sponsored this measure. In 2013, the EU listed Hezbollah's military wing as a terrorist organization. It has yet to include Hezbollah's political wing. There is no distinction. This is one terrorist organization, one that has wreaked havoc across the globe for over 30 years. From the bombing of a Jewish center in Argentina in 1994, to the bombing of a tourist bus in Bulgaria in 2012, to its thousands and thousands of fighters doing Iran's dirty work inside Syria, propping up the murderous Assad regime. The so-called business affairs component of Hezbollah brings in hundreds of millions of dollars a year through narco-trafficking, money laundering, and counterfeiting operations throughout Latin America, Africa, and Europe. I applaud the cooperation that has taken place between law enforcement agencies across Europe and our own to crack down on these illicit activities. But we cannot continue to pretend that any part of Hezbollah has any sort of legitimacy. I urge our European friends to take action now and designate the whole of Hezbollah as the terrorist organization that it is. And I'd like to spend my remaining time talking about the despicable human rights abuses taking place in Iran against the Iranian people and against foreign nationals. First, House Resolution 274 condemns the horrific persecution of the Baha'i faith in Iran. For years, Baha'is have been subject to government raids on their businesses, their schools, and their homes. They're prevented from working in government jobs, from attending colleges, and from worshiping. There are currently 93 Baha'is in prison in Iran. Iran's persecution of the Baha'is and other minorities is just another example of this brutal regime's complete and total disregard for human rights and international norms. Second, House Resolution 317 calls for the immediate release of all Americans held in Iran. For too long, this regime has taken American and other foreign nationals prisoners on trumped-up charges, resulting in sham trials and outrageous sentences. There is no rule of law. There is no due process. This is nothing more than hostage-taking, and it must stop. This committee has a long history of speaking out against these unjust detentions, and we will not sit idly by while Americans languish in Iranian jails. And every responsible nation should join us in condemning Iran and calling for the immediate release of these Americans and other foreign nationals unjustly held in Iran. And finally, I'd like to thank the chairman and the other co-sponsors of House Resolution 185, which calls on Iran to return my constituent, Bob Levinson. For those of you who have served on this committee for a while now, you've heard me tell Bob's story many times. You've heard me tell it to 3 secretaries of state, to UN ambassadors, to State Department officials. You've heard it while members of the Levinson family sat before you in this very room. I will keep telling Bob's story until Bob is home in South Florida with his wife of over 40 years, Christine, with his 7 children, Susan, Stephanie, Sarah, Samantha, Dan, David, and Doug, his sons and daughter-in-law, and his 7 grandchildren. One of Bob's grandsons recently underwent treatment for cancer. Thankfully, his prognosis is good, but it makes me sick to think that this family had to endure those months of treatment without their husband, their father, and their grandfather. Bob's 8th grandchild is due any day now. On the 10th anniversary of Bob's disappearance back on March 9th, I said that Bob should be home in time for the birth. But here we are, 10 years, 3 months, and 20 days from the date Bob went missing in Iran. That is too long for any family to go without their loved one. Iran must return Bob now. If this regime claims it doesn't have Bob, it knows who does. More promises of assistance are too little, too late. The time for action is now. Iran wants sanctions relief. Iran wants foreign investment. Why would any responsible company do business in a country that illegally kidnaps and detains foreigners? And I might ask, why would any reasonable American company do business in a country that kidnaps American citizens? Bob Levinson is now the longest-held American hostage, but I remain hopeful. I'm hopeful that this administration will continue to exert pressure on Iran. I'm hopeful that we will soon welcome Bob home to Coral Springs, Florida. I'm hopeful that Bob will be home to see the birth of his next grandchild. Madam Chairman, you have been a heroic ally with me in this effort. I thank you for being my partner. I thank you for bringing forward all of these bipartisan measures today and for continuing to conduct this committee in such a strong bipartisan manner. And I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deutsch, and I'm sure the family is just so grateful for you being a fighter for Bob all the time. Thank you, Ted. Mr. Shabbat of Ohio.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for holding this hearing, this markup this morning. I first want to speak briefly on HRES 185 by first commending you and also Mr. Deutsch for your relentless dedication to the case of Robert Levinson. As my colleague mentioned, the longest held U.S. Civilian hostage in American history, and I'd like to associate myself with both of the remarks that you made this morning and not repeat everything. I know that my colleagues will continue to press this issue. The U.S. Has consistently called for the safe return of Mr. Levinson and requested Iranian assistance in the matter, and the administration and our allies must continue to include Mr. Levinson's disappearance in any future communications with Iran. Iran has continued to make promises, yet no tangible results. Unfortunately, it's probably not surprising as we are talking about Iran here. I also rise in support of HRES 218, a resolution that I co-sponsored. It aims to strengthen the U.S.-Israel economic relationship. A strong economic partnership is critical to Israel, and it's also obviously in the United States' best interest as well. Israel continues to be one of our, if not our strongest allies on the globe, and we want to make sure that that continues. Furthermore, in light of Ambassador Haley's remarks, and she, of course, was before the full committee as recently as yesterday, regarding the UN Human Rights Council's targeted assaults on Iran, this legislation is particularly timely. As we all know, Israel consistently seems to be the target of all things the Human Rights Council in the UN. They spend, it seems, at least half their time targeting Israel, criticizing Israel. It's absolutely absurd. And then they'll say nothing about human rights abuses in Venezuela or Cuba or a whole range of other pretty horrible places right now for human rights on the globe. Yet Israel consistently is a target. So I think this is very timely that we're passing this today. We have to show our partners all around the world that we will continue to support Israel in every possible way, and HRES 218 reaffirms that position. So I would urge my colleagues to support all of the measures we have before us. I think they're all good, but I wanted to particularly talk about those two. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shabbat. Thank you for your words. And now we'll turn to Coverboy, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And thank you for bringing these bipartisan bills to us today. I'm proud to support all of them. I would ask unanimous consent that I be added before we vote to, as a co-sponsor.
Without objection, we'll do so.
HR 2646, thank you. And I particularly want to thank my friend and colleague Ted Deutsch for his passion and commitment to the Levinson family and to the cause of Bob Levinson. Everything he said is absolutely correct. No civilized nation can kidnap somebody visiting that country with impunity, indefinitely, and with no cause. And that's not the rule of law. That's not how civilized nations behave. And we certainly hope Mr. Levinson can be rejoined with his family at the earliest possible time. Madam Chairman, I think it's also important. I was listening to my friend, Mr. Shabbat, and I agree with him about the hypocrisy involving human rights in Israel in the Human Rights Commission at the United Nations. But I think it's important we have to be consistent. It would be nice if the President of the United States would speak out about human rights when he has the opportunity, an opportunity he did not choose to use when he visited Saudi Arabia, an opportunity he did not choose to use when he visited with the Russian foreign minister. And one could go down the list. It is vital that we speak with one voice and that we speak consistently in upholding rule of law and universal human rights, whether it be in Cuba or Iran or Venezuela. We need to speak with one voice, and so I would hope that the President would hear that message from Mr. Shabbat and myself and others. It's really important that it come from the top if we really mean it and if we're going to effectuate change. With that, Madam Chairman, I again thank you for bringing these bills to us today. Happy to support all of them, and thank you for your leadership.
Thank
I
you
yield
so
back.
much, sir. Thank you. And our hero, Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What an incredible series of resolutions. I applaud this committee for their work on them. They get directly to the heart of the most important issues for this committee. We identify and work with our allies like Jordan, with our friends like Israel. They seek to be the light. We call out evil. We call out injustice, Iran, Hezbollah, where we see it. These resolutions, they've found truth. I'm proud to support them, proud of this committee for their work on them, and I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mast. Mr. Schneider was here? No, not here. Mr. Liu.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Deutsch, for holding today's markup. I support all the legislation under consideration today, and am pleased that one of those measures is a resolution I introduced with Congressman Ted Poe. I also want to thank Congressman Shabbat for his kind words today and for being a co-author of the resolution. This legislation recognizes the incredible economic partnership and relationship between the United States and Israel, and encourages the administration to explore new areas of cooperation in promising fields like energy, water conservation, neurotechnology, and cybersecurity. Today, two-way trade is $40 billion annually. And despite representing only 2% of the population in the region, Israel is the third largest importer of U.S. goods in the region. And Israel, in fact, as mentioned before, has more companies listed on the NASDAQ than any other country except the U.S. and China. And this is fueling amazing innovations in companies from Silicon Beach in Los Angeles to Silicon Wadi in Tel Aviv. And the partnership has even thrived at the state level, with over 30 U.S. states, including my home state of California, signing agreements with Israel to deepen cooperation on mutual areas of interest. This resolution enjoys broad support in both the House and Senate, and I hope we continue to move it through Congress to send a strong bipartisan support for deepening U.S.-Israel cooperation in the promising fields of science and technology. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Liu. Mr. Schneider of Illinois.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank Chairman Ross-Lenton and Ranking Member Deutsch for holding this markup today. I appreciate the timely consideration of these bipartisan pieces of legislation that address key foreign policy issues, and also wish to express my support for all of them. One such issue is the terrorist organization Hezbollah and its impact around the globe. I was pleased to see that in 2013, the European Union designated Hezbollah's military wing as a terrorist organization. But this is simply not enough. That is why I am proud to co-lead with my colleagues HRES 359, which is a resolution that urges the EU to designate Hezbollah in its entirety as a terrorist organization. The resolution also expresses appreciation to the EU for progress in countering Hezbollah activities since the 2013 designation, and urges the EU to increase pressure on the group by freezing assets in Europe, prohibiting fundraising activities, and improving cross-border cooperation between EU members in combating Hezbollah. I'm also proud to co-sponsor HRES 218, which highlights the importance of the U.S.-Israel economic relationship and encourages continued cooperation in the fields of science and technology. The U.S. and Israel have a robust partnership when it comes to innovation, and we've seen this manifested through the creation and success of programs such as the United States-Israel Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation, U.S.-Israel Science and Technology Foundation, and the U.S.-Israel Binational Agricultural Research and Development Foundation. I look forward to the continued collaboration between our two nations and the innovative creations this partnership will deliver. I'm also proud to be a co-sponsor and co-lead of House Resolution 274, condemning the government of Iran's persecution of its Baha'i minority and continued violations of human rights. While Iran is a diverse country and home to religious minorities, including Baha'is, as well as a Jewish community with roots that go back to thousands of years, the government's autocratic rule in the name of a narrow interpretation of one version of Islam denies freedom of religion to many of its citizens, a liberty we value so deeply here in the United States and enshrined in the First Amendment of our Constitution. This persecution of Iranian members of the Baha'i faith, which ranges from blatant discrimination in the educational and employment spheres to the brutality of imprisonment and execution, cannot be tolerated. We must not forget that in addition to Iran's flagrant testing of intercontinental ballistic missiles and outright support for terrorism that threaten Israel and our other allies in the region, the Iranian people also suffer at the hands of the regime. The U.S. Baha'i House of Worship is headquartered in the Chicago area, and I firmly stand with the Baha'i community in the U.S. and Iran in calling for an end to this horrific religious persecution. I would also like to join my colleagues in highlighting the case of Robert Levinson, as has been noted, the longest-held U.S. civilian in our nation's history. No family should have to go through what Mr. Levinson's family has gone through. I am pleased to see this subcommittee take up House Resolution 185, which calls on the government of Iran to fulfill its repeated promises to assist in this case of Robert Levinson. And I look forward to him joining his family and welcoming his 8th grandchild. I would like to thank the subcommittee again for considering these important and relevant bills. And with that, I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swazi.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I want to thank you and the ranking member for your excellent bipartisan cooperation on all of these different issues. And I want to make a special thank you to Ranking Member Deutsch for actually reintroducing me to Mr. Levinson's sons recently. There are 7 children in the Levinson family, and it was 12 years ago that Mr. Levinson's mother-in-law passed away. And on Long Island, I was there for the family wake. I was serving as county executive at the time. And we were reintroduced here in the hallway not long ago by Mr. Deutsch, and I want to thank him so much for doing that. And I want to thank him for his personal commitment to this family in trying to help relieve the suffering that they are undergoing. And in each of these different issues that we're addressing, everyone on this committee is working together to try and relieve suffering at different parts of the world. And this is really important work, and it's wonderful that when everything in politics seems so petty and small these days, that people can work together to try and achieve some common good. So I'm happy to support each of these initiatives. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, and we're glad to see Mr. DeSantis and Mr. Zeldin with us as well. And hearing no further requests for recognition, the question occurs on the items considered en bloc. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the measures considered en bloc are agreed to. Without objection, the measures considered en bloc are ordered favorably reported to the full committee as amended, and staff is directed to make any technical or conforming changes. That concludes our markup. The subcommittee stands adjourned, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us.